Hey everyone, welcome back to Cali Plants. Me again, Mark. Today we're back at the greenhouse with another video. For this one, I think I want to go back to our old common succulents. Now we all know a lot of us already have these plants, but I wanted to highlight some of the ones that people often kill, beginners often kill on their first try. These plants I've killed before as well. I actually had several copies of these plants over the months, over the years that I've been caring for them. A lot of them have died out, sadly, okay? But I think right now, a lot of them are looking good in my care, which is why I want to share some of the care tips that I have for you on how to keep these succulents alive. Now you can see here some of the plants that I already have, okay? But we're just gonna start with the zebra plant. A commenter recently asked me how to not kill a zebra plant. The zebra plants like this one and this one that I have here, these are Haworthiopsis. Other people are calling them Haworthia still. Though even though the names have been updated, they are now supposed to be called Haworthiopsis. Now this is the one variety that has more whiter stripes, and this is the more common one, okay? But these are not, there are actually two types of zebra plants, the fasciata and the attenuata. And I think that these one are the attenuata because the fasciata are the rarer zebra plants. But still they're called zebra plants because they look the same, okay? I think the other one, the fasciata, doesn't have stripes on the inside of the leaves. And I can see on these two plants of mine that they have stripes on the inside. So that means that they are attenuatas. Now, zebra plants, they are related to aloes and they are related to other types of Haworthias, the window pane Haworthias, they're related to that. And what is special about them is that they are more tolerant of water compared to our other succulents. The roots are actually much thicker. If you manage to look at an established zebra plant, the roots will be much more larger, like with the aloes, compared with these other succulents which have thin hair-like roots. So knowing that, a lot of people would think that it's easy to keep this plant alive. So which is why it's actually a concern right now. I'm actually wondering right now why a lot of people still kill their zebra plants, because I myself have also killed that before, but right now I'm actually thinking of them as very resilient plant. They don't really die very easily. So what you can do to keep them alive is you have to make sure that you have the right potting mix for them. What I use is the same potting mix that I use with the other succulents, but sometimes I will add a little more pumice if I'm feeling like it. Okay, this one you can see it has a lot more pumice, but it still has enough organic materials for the plant to attach itself to. If you don't have enough organic materials on it, the plant will usually become very dry, okay? They will stay dry because they have no water to absorb. So this one looks like it's a bit dry, okay? That is what a dry zebra plant looks like. This is what a hydrated one looks like, okay? The leaves will be much more open and you can feel it, okay? If they are drinking water, they are much more firm. If your plant is not drinking water, if they stay dehydrated, even if you water them, if their leaves don't become firm, then you have something, you have a problem with your potting mix. So you have to adjust your potting mix for that. For the sunlight requirements, I think another reason why a lot of people are killing this one, because they're putting this in a very shaded location. Now, a lot of references online will say that zebra plants are very easy to care for. You can just put them as windowsill plants. You can put them beside the window and they will still survive. Now, there are other countries that can do that, that can keep their Haworthias alive by a windowsill. But here in the Philippines, I don't think that we should exaggerate that too much. We shouldn't put this in a very dark location because it's still a plant, it still needs sunlight to survive. Now, I would recommend partial shade or full sun for these Haworthias, okay? These plants of mine are growing in a full sun location here in the greenhouse. They're just in a much more shadier part of the greenhouse where they get more filtered light than direct light. So that is what I would recommend with your Haworthias. They will thrive better outdoors than indoors. So what you can do if you want to display them indoors is you can put them outside when you're not inside the house, and when you want to have some decoration, have some display, just bring them back in. But during the day, you can put them outside in a pretty partially shaded area. They kind of like the sunlight that I think other peperomias will also appreciate. Not full sun, just some light shade, okay? but also not very dark. So that's what I would recommend for these haworthias. Also, what would happen if you put them in a very shaded location and if you water them, they will start rotting. So that is the problem that you might have with your haworthia if you're killing them, putting them in a too much of a shaded location and then watering them too much, because if you don't give them enough sunlight, they won't have roots, and without roots they won't be absorbing water and they will be much more prone to rotting. The next plant on our list is this jade plant. Okay, you can see here my jade plant that is already looking beautiful, but it's still dry because I haven't watered it recently. Okay, jade plants are some of the thirstier succulents I noticed, and they actually need to be watered consistently. You can check their leaves. If they're flapping like this, then that means that the plant is already thirsty. And you can also tell if your plant is actively growing because it will have these new leaves at the top. Okay, so you can see there are new leaves growing here. So these are leaves that it had grown in my care. Okay, we have a new leaf coming here on this side, and we have leaves here, we have leaves here, tiny leaves that are growing. That means that the plant is actively growing. If your jade plant is not producing those little leaves at the tips, then your jade plant is not doing well. Now, what I find to be difficult about these ones is that back then when I was still beginning, a lot of my potting mixes doesn't have organic materials on them, very little organic materials. They have a lot more pumice, and since I started adding alnus compost to my potting mixes, my jade plant has been doing well. So I was actually avoiding jade plants because, as you all know, in my channel I have featured several of my jade plants before. I've had some success with them, but ultimately all of them died. When I was starting out with the alnus compost mix, and when I was using it already, I tried it with the jade plant. I bought this one from a neighbor, from a nearby succulent seller, plant seller. I bought this one, and she was actually surprised as well that I managed to keep it alive. And it's also in the same location that my zebra plants are growing here in the greenhouse. They're in this much more shady location. So they're actually very quick to grow. They're very easy once you have the right potting mix for them. They will appreciate a lot more sunlight than a lot of you guys are thinking, because a lot of references online will also be saying that jade plants can be grown as a windowsill plant. But as I said before, succulents appreciate a lot more sunlight than what is often talked about them. So you might want to put this in a shady spot outside your house. You can train it, acclimate it to tolerate a much full sun location, and if you do that, you will probably also get some reddish orangey tips on the jade plant if you really acclimate it so that it wouldn't burn. So that will take some time to acclimate it to full sun. Usually you would want to establish your plant first before you give it blasting hot sun, but if you do, your jade plants will actually look much more better. So I would recommend that you start really with the alnus compost and the pumice potting mix for your jade plants so that they can survive. And also, don't neglect it too much, because if you already notice that the leaves are flapping, then that means that the plant is thirsty. And as I said with the zebra plant, if your plant is not plumping up after watering it, if you water it and then the leaves are still flappy like that, and you already want to water it again because they don't absorb water, then you have a problem with your potting mix. Start with the potting mix, adjust your potting mix on your jade plants. Some people usually will have troubles with this one because they usually think that, oh, I have some success with this potting mix with my other succulents, and this plant, why is it not surviving in the same potting mix? Well, because some other succulents can actually tolerate a rockier potting mix than jade plants. Okay, so that's what I would say. I've had success with rockier potting mixes with my other echeverias, with my thicker leaf succulents, but that doesn't always work with the jade plant. So I would recommend that you add a little more organic material to your jade plant. Experiment on it. Since jade plants are very cheap, you can actually buy them over and over again just to see what works for them, so you can test out different experiments on your potting mix. And once you do, you will have a much more easier, happier time growing them. And also, you can get to try out other varieties of jade plants. Actually, I have other varieties coming in at the following months because I ordered some. So if you manage to grow this one, this basic one, you can grow a lot more different crassulas, and it will be a very nice, interesting plant to have. Crassulas are very varied, very diverse group of plants, and they are all very pretty and interesting. So if you manage to start out with the jade plant, you can have a success with all of your other crassulas as well. Okay, now let's move on to our next plant. The next plant that we have here is our Sedum rebrootingtum. You can see here all the plants that I have. Okay, this used to come from a single plant. Okay, I think there were 2 stems on there, and right now it has produced a lot of growth. Okay, oh no, this is not the same. I think I forgot. I think I remembered wrongly. This used to come from 2 different plants that I combined in a single pot, and then they were desiccating. So I repotted them over and over again, and right now they are growing in this single container, and they have already produced a lot of pups. Okay, and they also started doing well when I had those compost potting mix. So you can pretty much figure out that right now all of my tips will be surrounding the potting mix that I'm using. Okay, but they actually did very well. Usually we think of Sedum rebrootingtum or other sedums to be very sensitive when it comes to watering because they have these thick leaves, but actually they like it to be a little more on the moist side compared with your other succulents, and they also like it to be very sunny because they're actually very active growers. So if you don't give them enough sunlight that they need, they will stretch very quickly and they will also rot very quickly. So that's what you would expect with active growing succulents. They are more sensitive to changes in sunlight and changes in moisture and in their potting mix. Now, why is this jelly bean often desiccates with a lot of people? Because they are active rooters as well. They produce roots very quickly, and if the roots don't attach to organic material in your potting mix, then they will lose a lot of their leaves producing roots which doesn't attach, which will die very quickly because they don't attach to anything, and in that turn will make your plant desiccate. It will lose a lot more leaves than it is growing them. So that's what I've been talking about in our other videos recently. So I would recommend that you add more organic materials to your potting mix and then give it a lot of sunlight. Don't put it in a shady location. I would say this compared with the Huertia and the jade plants. Jelly beans are very thirsty when it comes to their light needs. They really need strong, direct sunlight. You might think that, oh, my plant will just burn if I put it in direct sun. Well, you don't have to worry about that because the jelly bean plant will produce new leaves very easily, very quickly. Even if you burn some of their leaves, they're actually very active growers, so they would appreciate a lot more sun. And this one is actually growing in a rain or shine location, and the sunlight is not doing it for us right now. Okay, I would recommend that you just put this in a very bright location in your garden. Don't put this indoors. I would say that you can put the zebra plant and the jade plant indoors, but the jelly bean, I would avoid putting them indoors because they will drop a lot of leaves very easily. If you have problems with your jelly beans producing air roots, however, that means that the roots are not attaching to the potting mix as well. That is one reason why they will produce air roots. They're not attaching to their potting mix, so you can also adjust their potting mix. But sometimes it will just grow air roots because the surrounding area is very humid. So you might want to put it in a much more drier location because once it gets very humid and the plant gets very tall, it will really produce a lot of their air roots. And the plant usually goes very tall if you desiccate a lot of their bottom leaves. That means that the plant will be preparing for it to topple over, and then once it bends over, it will just reattach to the soil because the stems are already too long. So that's why these plants grow air roots. But once you can see here, once they are actively growing and they have the right potting mix and the right sunlight, they will not produce air roots anymore. And I would recommend that you just train this one quickly. If you have it, train it on a rain or shine location very quickly. Once you manage to establish it, once you know it already has roots, put it right away in a rain or shine location. You will appreciate your jelly beans more if they're in a more sunnier location. Just make sure that you have enough organic materials in their potting mix. Okay, but still, a lot of the care that I'm sharing here are adjustable to you. If you have plastic pots, ceramic pots, then you may want to do your own readjusting. But sedums, these sedum Rubrotinctum, really, I find that it's really sensitive. I'm not sure I find anyone growing this in a ceramic container. Okay, since they're ones that doesn't look good for very long, they actually look very ugly very quickly. Especially if they're not stressed, they will look this dull green color, and they will also etiolate very quickly if you don't have the right sunlight for them. So they're actually very demanding plants when it comes to sunlight, and when it comes to their potting mix and their watering and their care. They're actually much more demanding than your other succulents. But when you manage to grow them well, then they will start looking good as well. Okay, so we have that very demanding common succulent. I actually wonder why this is still a common succulent. Okay, maybe because it grows a lot very easily, but this common succulent is really not for beginners. Okay, especially if you have experience with your other echeverias. This succulent may not be a good one right away. So why am I touching that? That's not our next plant. This is our next plant. This is Echeveria Nevada. Okay, Agavoides Nevada. I've had these plants several times before. I've killed many of these plants. When I was starting, it was a Nevada that was one of my new succulents when I was starting out, and right now I still have new Nevadas because a lot of them I have killed in the past. Okay, this one is a two-headed one, and this came in as a larger plant. It already shrunken in size, but I managed to repot it, adjust my potting mix on it to make it grow again, and right now it's actively growing. You can see here, these are all new growths because this was very small when I repotted it in this container. So the same thing I would recommend with my other succulents. Add more organic material. You can see here that the potting mix I use are still pumice heavy. There's still a lot of pumice in them, but because I added organic material, the plant is establishing. So you can also adjust the potting mix that I shared with you. You can use it with more pumice, and you can still have some success with it as long as you use alnus compost. I would actually avoid using carbonized rice hull right now. Some people still use it. Good for them. Okay, you can experiment with that ingredient, but I'm having more success with the alnus compost and the vermicast potting mix that I have. Okay, so my camera just crashed on me, and I was actually very worried if my recording stopped as well. Okay, so now we're starting anew. I hope that the last one is saved. Okay, this is the last plant that we have. This is our lovely rose. I would not say that this is a very common succulent because I think it's still being sold as an uncommon one, but it's also very popular, and also a lot of sellers will already be growing this lovely rose, and you can see here on the plant that I have grown. Okay, I think this was two different plants or three different plants I bought, and I combined them into this one large pot. Now, lovely rose, your Graptoveria lovely rose, is related to your Harry Watson, Fred Ives. They're both hybrids from Graptopetalum and Echeveria. And what I find with these lovely rose, they're also some of the more active growing succulents out there. Much like with your jelly bean and with your Agavoides Nevada, they're very active in their growth. They produce a lot of leaves very quickly once you manage to get the right conditions for them, and they will just continuously grow. They're not as dormant as your other succulents, which is why they're very popular, and a lot of growers will already be selling them. Okay, now what I find with the people who are growing this are they're very sensitive when it comes to handling this plant because they think that it will burn in full sun. Okay, but this is actually not a very sensitive succulent. It might look delicate, it might look like it's very sensitive, but it's not. It's one of the more resilient succulents I have. When it comes to its sunlight needs, the plant is actually very resilient in full sun, which is why I would recommend that you don't put this plant in a very shady location, because that's usually the time that the plant will start deteriorating. If you put it in a shaded location, it will start rotting, the leaves will become mushy even if you don't water it, because it's an active grower. It will become very mushy, it will rot very easily if you put it in a very shaded location. So I would recommend that you put it in blasting full sun very quickly. Once you establish it, don't put it in a shady location for too long, bring it outside to the sun. And also, if you manage to still keep this alive in a shaded location, you will see that the growth will be not that pretty like with this one. The rosette is much more open compared with the ones here. The rosette is much more compact. It looks more like a rose. So that's what you can expect if you grow this in a full sun location. So I would recommend you give this maximum sunlight. Put it in the brightest area in your greenhouse or in your garden, so you can get much more beautiful growth on this plant. And also, if you water it, you will notice that the plant will still continuously produce leaves. Okay, if you have the right potting mix on it. Right now I'm using the same potting mix that I used with my other succulents. I added allulose compost to it. Once the plant attaches to the organic material in your soil, it will just continuously grow from there. So you don't have to worry about it burning again, because if it does burn, it will still replace those burnt leaves. Sunburn is actually the least of your worries when it comes to these plants, because with burning you can still replace their leaves with new ones. But if you rot them, if they become rotten, usually the stem will also die, and that will mean that the plant will already die also. So I would recommend that you put this in more sunlight. Don't worry about it burning too much. It also has a lot of farina, so it already has that some protection with the sun, because it has farina on it, so it will be much more resilient when it comes to sunlight. So I would recommend that you just give it a lot of sun, put it in an allulose compost and pumice potting mix, and then water it once the leaves become a little wilted. Okay, you don't have to wait for the leaves to really drop off, because this one drops a lot of leaves very easily. You don't have to wait for the bottom leaves to dry out and to drop off before watering it, because once you have the right sunlight for it, once you know that it's not etiolating, you might want to continue watering it even without it drying out. That way you will still retain the rosette on this plant. You can see this one already has grown too tall. Okay, because usually if you don't water it right away, it will really dry out its leaves very easily. So just continuously water it. Don't leave it dry for a very very long time, because once you keep it dry, it will desiccate a lot of the leaves that it has. Okay, but that's what I think, that's what's amazing about this plant, is it actually stays true to its name, lovely rose, because it really looks like a rose for a very very long time. Even if it grows a long stem, it will still look like a rose, because that's how rose grows. It grows in a long stem, and then we have a head. So that's what you can expect with the Graftobrya lovely rose. Okay, and I hope that the tips that I gave you will keep your lovely roses alive as well. Okay, so I think that's about it for the common succulents that we have, and it's already, the light is already not giving us justice. The light is really really bad right now. Okay, so I think that's about it for this video, guys. I think I've ranted on for too long. I was actually expecting for this to be a shorter video. If you have any other plans that you are concerned with, that you want me to share tips with, if I have them, I will make videos on them. So just please make sure to comment it down below. Like this video if you haven't already, and subscribe to the channel to keep us growing, and then we'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.